Hi, my name is Steve Schultes. I'm class of 1978, former distance runner, and today I've got a very unique opportunity. I'm here today to introduce the first of what we hope to be many interviews with some of our Penn track and field legends, and we've got quite a few. First on deck, though, is one of the greatest high school runners of all time and the greatest distance runner ever at Penn, and that is Mr. David Merrick. David, it is great to see you. Welcome, my friend.
Steve, thanks very much for the intro. Glad to join you.
Great. Well, Dave, we're going to have to walk you down memory lane here today. We've got a lot of high school stories and college stories that we're going to redo. So hopefully you've got your thinking cap and memory all in place today to go through this. I should warn you that we've got three people that have already offered some of their thoughts, three of your high school colleagues. One is Coach Al.
Right.
We've got a Zoom tape of him. One of your best buds and high school teammates, Dave Walters, and also one of the greatest distance runners of all time, Craig Virgin, also had a few things to say today. So throughout our discussion, those guys will be coming in with some tape thoughts that they had. Now, before, Dave, we get into our discussion, it might be helpful for those people that may not know you that well to just recap some of your performances, not all of them, but the top ones, I think, from both high school and college. So let me just start first with high school. David is a 5-time state champion, including 2 times he won the state cross-country championship. You know, most of us would kill to just get one. Dave won twice. And he did it in the state of Illinois, which isn't a small state like mine in Connecticut. His PR in the mile was 4:05.6, 2-mile 8:43.2. Dave, we'll talk this later, but I think those times are pretty doggone close to Prefontaine's during the day. He also broke a Jim Ryan, that's right, Jim Ryan indoor mile record for 12 laps, 4:09.7. He had a famous double that's legendary in Illinois state track meets where he beat Craig Virgin, a sophomore, at 8:48.4, and then came back and beat Mike Durkin, a terrific college runner, in the mile at 4:07.7. He won the Golden West at 8:48, which is the National High School Championship race. And he broke an indoor 3-mile record at Madison Square Garden, 13:37.7. In college, when Dave finished his time at the University of Pennsylvania, as of today, and we're talking 45 years now, Dave still holds the 10,000 meter outdoor track record at 28:49. He anchored a 4x1500 meter relay team at the Penn Relays in '76 that set a US record. Dave anchored that race. He still holds 2 tremendous records. The first is Belmont Plateau, which is the Philadelphia course record. Everybody in Philadelphia, everybody in the mid-central states have run this course, set that record at 24:44. And the kind of the Kentucky Derby of cross-country running, Van Cortlandt Park in New York, everybody's run it. Dave Merrick set that record in 1975 at 23:51. That record was never beaten a mile. Dave, I'm sure we'll get into this. Maybe at the meters today, it's somebody's run close or just a little bit better, but it's a legendary record for Dave in college. So Dave, a lot of stuff to cover. We may not get to all of these, but it's daunting just to see some of those, frankly. Before we get in, though, Dave, to some of those races, maybe we can start at the beginning and talk about the early years. And I'm just curious, I know you started in baseball, as a lot of us did, and then you even, God forbid, tried out for football, and quickly you got religion and came out for cross country.
Got hit
Before
once.
you ever ran a step, before you ever, did a workout or, ran a race, did you think you had some talent in running, or was this just a lark? I'm just going to try something in the fall.
No, I actually had a natural aptitude for running. They had the president's health fitness thing when you were in grade school. And I did really well in the, I think it was a half mile that you had to run. So it gave me an inkling that I might like to try running, but I went out, all my buddies went out for football as a freshman, got off the bus, went out, got all our stuff, got hit one time, said, that's enough of that. Went out for cross country, so.
We always remember, Dave, the first race, last race. We're going to talk about the last race a little bit later, but the first race, how'd you feel before the race? What happened in that first race? I'm assuming it was varsity cross country. And then what did you think about this crazy sport afterwards?
Um, we ran all together. So we ran varsity and fresh soft at the same time. You just kind of finished them separately. And I chased the varsity guys from a training standpoint. They'd try to take you out and then drop you, out in the out in the sticks, something, as seniors always do. But they couldn't get rid of me. So I just tag along behind them and did the same thing in the race. I think at my first race, I finished fourth in the varsity as a freshman. So I didn't get to run fresh off after that.
Wow.
So I got stuck.
Dave, I wanted to introduce one video before we even begin, because I could probably talk about your performances, for an hour alone, but Craig Virgin had a few comments, but we wanted to maybe throw one video in first on how Craig Virgin thought about you in terms of your performances. And I thought it was kind of a good way to cap off, just your career in total. So if we could, let's just hear a bit from Craig.
Dave, for me, the most critical component that Dave played in my career was that he showed me the difference between being good and being great. Dave Merrick was one of the greatest high school distance runners that America ever had, and kind of underappreciated today because he didn't go on to make an Olympic team or world championship team. So his career was rather short by what guys have today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to Craig, by the way. He had a lot of great things that you'll hear later. And by the way, in the background, I don't think that's his house, but I think James Dean said you were pretty good too. I think he said his mom's house there.
Right.
What happened, Dave? What was the progression for you freshman year, sophomore year? What was the, on the cross country team, maybe what was your times like? What kind of times did you have freshman year through sophomore year?
Huge change in training. We had I had three coaches in high school. My first cross country coach, I forgot his name, what have you. Then Joe Rodriguez took over winter track, and then cross country my sophomore year. Coach Rod was a ex-Marine. He just beat, excuse my French, the crap out of us. So we started putting in, we started putting in distance with intensity, with focus. So over my freshman's winter season, we had to run Polar Bear Club. We had to put in 500 miles over winter track from end of cross country to beginning of track. So I think we all finished like 550, 560 miles. That made a huge difference in terms of having that reservoir distance in the springtime. So I think I got down to right at 10 minutes. I chased Gary Moss, who was a senior. I chased him every race my freshman year. He ran, I think, 9:58, and I got close to him. I ran right at 10 minutes. So then over the summertime, it was just logging a lot of distance.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I want to talk to you about training, Dave, because, we've talked this before, but back in those days, it was really still in its infancy phases, what to do in training, speed, distance, what was the right way to go. And, we talked to Coach Al about that, and also Dave Walters. And I want to play a couple-minute clip on the philosophy of Coach Al, who I know is your senior year coach, but I wanted to give folks a feel for how they were thinking about coaching and how Dave Walters perceived your training, to give folks a feel for what you were doing back in the day. So let's hear first from Coach Al.
Our philosophy of training, and that was quite a bit of mileage. I mean, it wasn't unusual to have 100-mile weeks in the middle of our season or our preparation. And the other thing I think that was crucial was Dave was, none of us were believers in this long, slow distance concept. When Dave went out to do a distance run, he went out to challenge himself. Doing quality distance miles as like putting money in the bank. And that's something that you can draw back out on when it came time to race, when a race was tough. And he bought into that completely, and he epitomized it. When other teammates saw his work ethic, they said, gee, maybe I can do that too, if I work that hard. Because Dave was not a physical super specimen by any means at all. So other people would look at him and say, if I work hard, I can accomplish that as well. For 30 years, there was this trickle down effect of Dave Merrick and what he did for the Lake Police program.
During training runs with Dave, it was always a special treat to run with Dave, and he'd take me out from his house on, say, a typical 10-mile course that he loved. And halfway through, after a normal pace of 6 miles to 6:30s, they would start to pick it up, and he would find any excuse to pick up the pace, whether it was a stop sign or having to jump a puddle or there's a dog chasing us, whatever it happened to be. Dave would turn that 10-mile run into a fartlek. And it would be a brutal fartlek. It would be, Dave would sprint for 200-300 yards, and then he would dare you to catch him back. And it, over the summer, it developed into this, macho man fest where he would sprint away and I would eventually catch him, and then I would sprint away from him and he would have to catch me. And it was agony by the time we got back in.
Dave, you were rough in the workouts, my friend. But
that was Coach Al's philosophy was training with purpose. And
yes.
as he said, I think the biggest thing from early on to junior, senior year was putting money in the bank. We trained every day.
Yep.
And we trained every day with a purpose. So.
Yep. When did you, Dave, sort of go all in? Was it right away? I mean, are we talking sophomore year? Or when did you say I'm all in this sport?
Beginning of sophomore year. I enjoyed my freshman year. I ran 10 minutes for 2 miles. My sophomore year, ran 9:21 then as a sophomore.
Wow.
But it was purely because of logging miles and I look back on it. We were really, really lucky because Walt was I got to train with Walt when I took my year off. We had our best training runs. But we had just a gang of really good runners across the board. Coach Rodriguez, before Al, would pit us against each other, and we had the sprinters and we had the distance guys. So we had this little loop that we had was like a 300 meter, and the sprinters loved it because they could beat the crud out of us for 300 meters. But then we had the varsity lab that was about 660 on the other side. So we got to get even with them. But we had guys that ran 153, 154. We had 40, sub 50, second, quarter milers. And I had a guy, Al Carlson, that put in every mile that I did. And I have no idea why he didn't run as well as I did. It was mental a little bit, but it's Al put in every step that I did. So
yeah, it's impressive, Dave. It really is. We Craig Virgin said something that this is advice you gave him as a senior, but he was a sophomore, so we're right at the point you are then. I just want to share with you what kind of advice you gave him, and I'll tell you, Dave, you probably know this, but it's stuck on his mind forever. But I want you to hear what he said about the advice you gave him when he was a sophomore.
Dave Merrick was the catalyst for my career in the most critical time, which was the first 4 years of high school. I overlapped with him only 2 years. So when I was a freshman and sophomore, David was a junior and senior. And I watched him win state championships in track his junior year. And I was there in cross country his senior year and back again in track his senior year. And he gave me some really key advice. I said, Dave, what do I have to do to be good at this? And he said, well, Craig, I think you're on your way. But he said, are you going to run basketball this winter? Or are you going to play basketball this winter? Or are you going to run and train for track? And he told me that the good ones run in the wintertime and do that. And then the second thing was, he said, Craig, do you do morning runs? And he explained to me that was when you get up at 6 or 6:30 in the morning and do 3 to 5 miles. And then you still have your normal workout in the afternoon. This was rather revolutionary to me.
Dave, you know, double workouts were, there was always a mixed bag on that. And back in those days, I thought some high school coaches said it's like throwing the curveball in Little League. Others said you got to get it for stamina. Who was influencing you on the doubles? Was this the coaches? Were you looking at
both.
the other guys out there?
Coach Rob was my junior year, and Coach Al started. He was the assistant coach, and they were huge advocates of just log some miles in the morning. You know, get four or 5 in, even 3. Just something, you know, it's money in the bank. And that's, the morning runs they weren't as intense, not unless you know, when I was off for the year. And I'd meet Walt in the morning, and we'd pound away at it in the morning sometimes. Morning runs were just, you know, 6.5, 7, you know, 6.5 miles, just putting money in the bank.
Well, Mr. Virgin listened to it, and he credits a lot to you. I think it's important too, the kind of advice and help you gave. Both those guys felt you helped them immensely, Dave. I know you know that. Let's get into junior year, Dave, and just, you know, walk us through a little bit of the, you know, the cross country season. You know, you go from 921. And now you're going to win the state championship in cross country for 2 years in a row. Walk us through that first one, Dave. How in the world did you go from 921 to then beating the entire state of Illinois junior year? That's a feat few of us can even comprehend.
Huge training philosophy change. Over the summertime from sophomore to junior year, I think we put in 1,000+ miles, just building up the bank. But then Coach Al began to kind of introduce kind of training with intensity and training with purpose. So when we went out in the summertime, it was, you know, Farlick, and it was pretty good pace. So we were getting, you know, we were building up the base at that point. And then we had, just like when I got to Penn, we had just a group of really good guys to run with. So any given day, I could pick somebody, and somebody was fresh, and we put, you know, a good 10 or 12 in all the time.
Were you favored to win that state championship junior year? Was it a tight race? How did that race go?
There's a guy who went to Yale. Andy Rupert was kind of a co-person at the time. I hammered him. it was a challenge. I sat there and I said, okay. I had run against him earlier in the year. It came down to a sprint at the end. But we'd gotten much stronger throughout the season. And we were kind of a co-leader at the same time. I think I won by 20 seconds.
You know, the other thing I learned, and we gave Craig the bio on your performances, and one of the things he picked out and really wanted to emphasize was, and I think the number is 18, Dave, but 18 times in high school you broke the 9-minute 2 mile. That's a great achievement in college. 18, 23. He said it's still the best ever. First off, do you recall what the number was your last 2 years? How many times you broke 9?
Right around 18, but it was actually more than that because we ran winter track. No, we ran winter track up at the University of Chicago, and they didn't count those because they were AAU meets, so they weren't high school.
So 23 could be right.
You can't count them because that's against open athletes. I said, yeah, but I won. It didn't make any difference if you got third or fourth or something else and somebody pulled you along. I'm going, yeah, but I won them all. So, but anyway, that's.
When I hear that, Dave, 18 times, that to me means, and tell me if this is true, that there was no taking the pedal off. That when you're in a dual meet, you're running on the, you know, asphalt or whatever, you're going all out. I mean, is it safe to say, Dave, that each race, each training run was not just with a purpose, but full pedal down?
It's just what you said. Al emphasized training with a purpose. When you went out and you stepped on the track, it was all about pace and tempo. He said, look, you can run 9:30, 9:20, whatever it is. Your tempo pace is right at 9 minutes. So you go out the first mile before 4:28, and you were right on it, just stayed on it. So
Impressive. Each of those guys, Dave, independently wanted to talk about what they perceive to be one of your greatest accomplishments, and it's winning the 2 mile and the mile at the state championship your senior year. And a couple of us heard it, and we're getting goosebumps just listening to them tell it. So I wanted to hear, I wanted to have you hear Craig Virgin, who would have been a sophomore,
Right.
and then Coach Hale's rendition of that race, and then I want your reaction and your thoughts about that impressive double.
The meeting of the Titans, and he didn't take that too seriously because I went out with him, and but he promptly dropped me right before the halfway point, and I hung on for second for a while and then faded all the way to sixth place. At state meet 2 mile, I beat him to the pole, and this time I had more stamina and endurance because I've been doing 2-a-days all winter, and I held him off for 5 laps, and then he got by me in the 6th lap, and then went on 8:48, and then come back later to win the mile in a 4:07, 4:08, something like that.
And on Saturday, he and Craig Virgin paired up real quickly, and they ran about the first 5 laps together on a fairly good pace. People in the stands were saying, "Oh my gosh, Craig is gonna beat Merrick," and we realized that Dave was helping Craig set a pace so that he could have an age group record, and I think Craig really wanted to break 9. So anyhow, after about 5 laps, Dave just started moving away, and he ended up running 8:48.9. Mike Durkin from the previous year in the mile did not run the 2. He opted out of the 2 mile. He was running the mile, and he was going to come fresh at Dave in the mile. And the race took off, and the 2 of them separated themselves from the rest of the pack almost immediately. And through 3 laps, they were basically just neck and neck. But as they went into the first turn of the last lap, Mike tried to come up beside and pass Dave, and Dave changed gears. As they came out of the turn and down the back straightaway, you gotta excuse me, I get excited about this. There were at least 3 gear changes, attempts to pass and gear changes by both runners. Dave holding him off every time. Going into the last turn, there was one more attempt, and Dave held him off, and you could just see that Mike Durkin just, that was it. He couldn't come up with any more.
Dave, these guys all remember that race. Do you remember it as one of your signature, runs in high school? And what did you think going in? Did you think you had both these wins, or was it this going to be a tough?
2 mile was pretty safe. I mean, Craig you have to remember, was a sophomore, so he was going to run right around 9 minutes. And the nice part about it was he took off for the pace and said, "This is great. I don't have to leave this race at all. I'm just going to tag onto him." Went through 4:26, 4:20, something like 4:28, for the mile. Let him lead for 5+ laps, and it's okay. I can go from here. And as they passed him, I remember looking out, "How do I break 9 minutes?" I just said, "Keep going, just keep going."
And he did.
He did. Really, and it was also, we had kind of strategized also in terms of I didn't want to overdo it in the 2 mile, so I wanted to keep something in the bank. So I wanted to win, obviously, but I figured going from 3 laps out, it was fine. 8:48 is not a bad time, and then coming back like an hour 15, hour 20 later against Mike Durkin, who was the one I was really focused on. Mike had much better speed than I had. As Coach Al said, he tried to pass 3-4 times the last lap, and it was one where he said, "Do not let him in front of you," because it's the same thing. He couldn't get by me, but I wouldn't have been able to get by him. So it was just kind of a mindset game of don't let him by you.
And Mike became I know he was a Big Ten champion, but I don't know, Dave, I think he ended up making an Olympic team even. Maybe it was
I think he's 2-time, if not 3-time Olympic champion, or not Olympic team member. So
yeah, so this is a pretty significant accomplishment. Dave, you mentioned strategy, and maybe this is a good place to talk that too. I mean, anybody that knows you knows that you're a guy that takes pride in trying to think through the strategy of the race, how it's going to go, what you need to do. And I want to get some further thoughts from you, but Dave Walters talked about that too, as one of your impressive traits. And I just want to have you react to what Dave said, and then I want to get into the mile again, if I could. But let's hear from Dave on, what he talked about from you, from a strategy thinking man's perspective.
One more thing that I want to talk about, and that is the mind games that Dave played. He didn't go out for a run with Dave and expect to just coast along and talk about this politics or whatnot. You would talk about this race or that race, or see what Jim Ryan did, or did you see what Steve Prefontaine did? Why did he run the race that way? Why did he run it this way? Dave was always, he dug into the nuts and bolts of racing tactics, and he was such a smart runner that he taught those around him to start thinking critically about what they were doing.
Dave, I think all of us were always impressed with that, even in college, that you took serious the strategy part of this, and it's one of probably your greatest traits, I think.
It was just a mental strength of being able to go, and it was that's where Tup and I would bang heads, quite a bit, because
We'll get there.
training with a purpose. When you put the hammer down in the middle of a race, you wanted to know you could go from that far out. And so when we were training, Tup was always no train, no strain. But in high school and then in college, you train with a purpose. If you went from a half mile or a mile out, you wanted to know you could make it. So
yeah, it's pretty impressive, Dave. I want to come back to one other point you just made before we finish up high school, and I know we're limiting it. It's just a time thing, but so you don't have the leg speed. 4:05 is some pretty impressive leg speed in high school. I know, 3 guys in the 60s broke the 4-minute mile, but that's awfully impressive. And so, you broke a Jim Ryan record at 4:09. You ran a 4:05. Just tell us, Dave, what kind of work were you doing on the track that would get you to that kind of times in high school? It seemed like, for a lot of Division I schools, that would be a school record. It's a very impressive mile time. I don't think a lot of us think of you as a miler, but in high school, you were throwing down some good numbers.
I go back to something I said earlier. I had just a great group of guys to train with. Al Davis was a 154, 153 half miler. Rick Klaus was a 153 half miler. So on speed days, I was chasing those guys. The only way I could beat them was if we're doing 10 quarters, I'd hammer them, chase them. They'd win the first 4 or 5, but from 5 on, I'd make them pay the price in terms of from 6 to 10, I'm going to win. But it was training with a purpose, and I had great guys to train with.
And it seemed like you were interested in punishing a lot of people. If we take that and what Dave Walters said, but that's another.
Hey,
one more thing, Dave.
You're going to pay for it.
National high school record. You go to Madison Square Garden, you run the AAU, and you top a 13:37. Did you think you had that in you? I think you finished 3rd, but this was a tremendous level of competition. And it ended up being a national record at the time. I don't know if it was breaking Lindgren's record or whatever, but what did you think going in, and how did that race go? Did it surprise you?
It did a little bit. Coach Rodriguez was my coach at that point, still, and he's kind of strategizing beforehand. We're looking at Frank Shorter. I'm going, Coach, we're not chasing him. That's not going to work. But I think it was Bjorklund was there, and fellow from Fredericks from Penn State. Yeah. And coach just sat there and said, pace off of Fredericks and then see what happens at the end. Chased him for 2 miles and then took off with a mile to go.
How long did that national record stay, Dave? Do you know?
Is it Fabricus? Broke it, but he did it at the Armory.
Wow.
But it's 10 years ago or so. Yeah.
For those listening, I would imagine, Dave, that kind of a time, which would be about a 14:07.8 5,000, that probably was the school record at most Division I's, including Penn at the time, I would imagine, right?
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, Dave, it's because of all these accomplishments, though, you were a man in demand coming out of high school, and a lot of folks are interested in hearing about the recruitment. So who were the schools that were really in play that you said, boy, these are the top schools that I might consider going to?
Well, at that time, the leading runners were, Jerry Lindgren from Washington State. Pre was at Oregon. Ryan was from Kansas. That was a one-trick pony though. They didn't have anybody else at Kansas. I looked at Villanova and then University of Illinois. That was pretty much it.
And Penn, I assume, or what?
Penn was in the background. They
Okay.
were my primary schools first. Tup entered the late. Tup entered the race late.
Okay, good. We want to get to that.
Right.
But let's start first with it probably in March, April or so, you commit to Villanova, I think. Is that about right now? So you go to the legendary coach, Jumbo Elliott, and you tell Jumbo, I'm coming to Villanova. And there's a lot of stories, Dave, from a lot of alumni about going to the AAU race. We've got Carl Thornton and Elton that went there and sort of said some things to you. We've got Tup at your high school, talking in your ear, probably after that. Reverend Stanley going to your house. What caused you to rethink Villanova and ponder maybe going to the University of Pennsylvania?
Tup did a great job of presenting the balance of running and academics. And he was, fair with Villanova. So look, it's a great school. It's a great running school, what have you. But at the same time, Carl, Julio, Elton, Penn had a plethora of really good runners at the same time. So they were in a pretty good position. Came out, looked at the Wharton School. The only thing that concerned me was it was a city, inner city place, since I was concerned about running so much on concrete. And in hindsight, probably a good concern. But as you all know, Tup is persistent.
Yes. This is a question now, Dave, not from me, but from some of the maybe nosy alumni. But what happened when you told Jumbo, I'm going to leave you with the altar, I'm going to go to Tup. And I think for those who don't know, Coach Tuppeny worked under tutelage for Jumbo, so they were good friends. One of his kids was, I think, godfather. So these are close people.
Right.
How did that go, if it went at all?
It really didn't. It was
Okay.
interesting because Jumbo came out to Illinois, came out to high school. We were doing winter track. We didn't run on our track. We ran in the neighborhood next door. He came out and looked at us and said, "You guys got to be kidding me! You run around your neighborhood?" I said, "That's what we got." And I signed with him then. And the funny part was that where Tup got to wheedle his way in, that was the last time I heard from Villanova.
Wow.
Yeah.
Story.
I signed with him, and then that was it.
That's a picture of you with Coach Tuppeny, I assume, at one of your track meets. Pretty cool shot, Dave.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. Dave Walter said, "Who was that guy behind us?" That's Tup.
I think we all know that. Well, Dave, you get to Penn in, I don't know, August, September of 71, I think.
Right.
How easy was it? I think the running part might be the easiest, but you're coming from Illinois, you've got to fit into the running program, Philadelphia, and a school that's academically pretty challenging. How easy was it to fit in on those three?
It was a hard transition. One, it was a really, I grew up in a really rural area. So the transition to Penn was a difficult one academically, and city-wise was the hardest part. The running part wasn't as hard. One, it was the Penn running family, so that was the easy transition.
Right.
It was just a great group of guys to and they helped do that bridge.
Yeah.
A bit.
And I assume, Dave, you knew going in that this is a talented group. I would assume Tup is telling you this, but you are walking into the best cross-country team ever assembled at Penn, right? I mean, I would imagine you knew that going in.
Well, and I think that was probably the easy transition. They ran as a pack. So there was no, line up and then just take off and somebody was going to win or something else. We ran as a pack for like the first 4 or 5 races, and then came in. It was 5 or 6 of us all at one shot.
And you get a chance, even though you said no to Villanova, it's hard to be away from Villanova because they're our next door neighbor, and you're going to run against Villanova a lot in the next 3 or 4 years. The regular season, Dave, how did that go? Can you give us a quick recap of how you did, how the team did? I assume you dominated every meet.
We did. I think we almost skunked everybody 15-50. I think Cornell came down to Belmont. I think they were the only team that scored on us all year long. It was 17 to 48 or something like that.
And then you get to the,
And then,
yeah,
well,
man.
even in the HEPs, then I think we scored 18 points.
yeah, it's pure domination. Now, before the HEPs, you get to the Big Five, and there you get to see some of the big boys run. Villanova's got a powerful team with a lot of great runners at the time.
They put
The
three
Big
guys
Five
in
race,
front of
Dave,
us.
I guess, was a bit of an eye opener.
They put 3 guys in front of us. They had Marty LaCory, Donald Walsh, and John Wright. They went 1, 2, 3. And I think we lost 27-29 in the Big Five. And then
Wow.
we go up to the IC4As, and we lose again by 2 or 3 points.
What did you do in that IC4A race, Dave? This is your first one. IC4As are the East Coast Regional, all the Division I schools. This is your first foray into Van Cortlandt Park in New York. How did that first race go? How did you, you've run Van Cortlandt now a few times, I assume. How did you like Vanny? And then how did you do in that first IC4A race?
Actually, the IC4A it was great because the in the HEPs, I always worried about getting lost in Van Cortlandt Park. Because
It's crazy.
you go back in there, I'm going, I go with Carl and them and go, how do you know where you're going back here? So that's with the IC4As, it was great because you just follow, you had somebody to follow in that course and that one.
Wow.
So
What place and time did you hit that day?
I think it was 6th,
Sixth.
5th or 6th, yeah.
A stellar performance. And Van Cortlandt is one of the legendary courses in the United States for cross country. And I think a couple of years before, Prefontaine and Lindgren got into a battle there. So it's a course that all the big boys had run in, and it's an impressive place. What was the team's expectations, Dave? You made the NCAAs, obviously. This is the best team ever Penn's assembled. What did you guys think was realistically the expectations at the NCAA meet? And then what were yours personally, and how did you do?
Tupper kind of talked to us about top 5. He had said the same thing in terms of, look, Villanova's a top rated. They were defending champions, as a matter of fact. And Tupp said, look, we're right in their heel steps. So why can't today be the day? And see what happened. It was also one where Tupp had said, this is it's a big pack of runners. Control yourself going out, which was a huge mistake. So I went out, kind of controlled, but it was a narrow course, and I spent the next 4.5 miles trying to pass guys. That was just a pain.
I know some of us got to run later in the NCAA, and that was not his approach later. It was get the hell out of first. Yeah. How did you feel, Dave, about cross-country season? Did you feel like I've met every expectation? Were you pretty pleased with how that first year of cross-country went?
Very much so. It was both had transitioned really well. The mental transition to running at college. The mental transition was actually made easier because of the pack of runners that we had to run with. Carl Thornton, Julio Piazza, Bobby Childs, Elton Fikes, Elliot Rogers. You just had a plethora of great guys to train with and run with.
Great runners.
And
I think, Dave,
they helped make that transition. So.
And I think, Dave, you got 18 in that NCAA race. I mean, at that time, it probably was the best performance by any Penn athlete, I would assume.
It was, yes.
And Dave, before we kind of get into some of other big races you ran, I think to tell the Dave Merrick story completely, we have to kind of, at this point, I think, talk about 2 topics that are part of your career. One is the injury situation, and then the decision to leave Penn. I read an article in the DP, our school newspaper, that right after cross-country season, and I guess when you went back for winter break, you got sick, they were saying. I don't know what the sickness was. It might have just been the flu. But shortly thereafter, Dave, it seemed like injuries started to come about. And I was wondering if you could help us walk through, Dave, what we kind of know as sort of the systemic injuries, the knee, the leg, the Achilles. But then there were also some crazy injuries that occurred. Can you kind of put into context for us just what were the injuries that you had? I guess starting right, indoor season, what was going on then?
Yeah, it's typical freshman. I wasn't burnt out after cross country, but that was a big transition, moving up that far in distance in cross country. Went home over the break and came back, And I don't know if it was flu or whatever it was, but I wasn't able to really train that much. I came back and began to have some complications with knees. Went home, training on the gravel roads was great, but I wasn't feeling real well, so I didn't put in a lot of miles to continue on. Came back to Philly and started pounding away to kind of catch up, and running on concrete in the wintertime. We didn't go out to Belmont, so you were training on concrete the whole time.
Yeah.
I made it probably halfway through the season and had my first complication with the knee problem. Didn't have surgery yet, but I go down to see Rudy Schmidt all the time, and he goes, well, you've got chondromalacia or something else and what have you. So taking more time off. So it's funny because I look at how much time I ran in college. I ran probably 25% of the time, 30% of the time.
I was going to say, I wrote down in my mind's eye 40, but I was being generous that I think, Dave, you only had one real indoor season in college, I think.
My senior year was the only one that was complete.
It's
So.
unbelievable. And but the knee started going, Dave, and then we had some Achilles problems. There was some other things that happened. I mean, what else went on through your career besides just the knee, or was it primarily the knee?
Primarily knees through halfway through freshman through junior year. Went up to see Dr. Schuster up in New York. He gave me orthotics, and that straightened the knee problem part out. I could train like a madman again.
Wow.
So I started putting mileage in. But I picked up Achilles tendon. It's called Hagelin's surgery, whatever it was. It was calcium deposits on your Achilles tendon. So I had through freshman and junior year, I had three orthoscopic surgeries for my cartilage in my knees, and then had one regular surgery on the knee, and then had Achilles tendon surgery my junior year.
What was Tup's role during this? Our coach. What was Tup? Was Tuppeny helping you quite a bit? Were you guys staying close in what was going on? Was he just sending you to place? I mean, how was the Schuster Tuppeny the help you were getting at Penn?
He was actually a great mainstay with that, and actually had a pretty good rock of the relationship all of us have had with Tup. I relied on him a lot, and he was there in a time of need. Good. Where one, you're struggling as an athlete to what's going on. I can't get over this, and he was really patient with, let's try this, let's try that, let's go see Dr. Schuster. But we went to see a fellow in Red Bank who was a cardiologist, and he was the one that then sent us up to see Dr. Schuster. So,
and Dave, this is a tough process. I mean, how did you mentally cope with this? I mean, when you're running 30% of the time, you've got these tremendous potential. It had to be pretty tough to cope with the fact that I can't compete during a lot of this time.
Personally, it was devastating.
Yeah.
Because one, I knew I was pretty good, and I looked at the opportunity of where I wanted to be and where I wanted to chase Prefontaine and these guys and what have you. But you probably, halfway through college, you kind of figured out that, this isn't going to work. So I've got to try to figure out training differently, going back to training with a purpose. So I said, well, I can't put in 100 miles and pound away at it. Can I train less, but train smarter? Kind of got me through.
You, at some point, Dave, in this next year, you make the decision to leave Penn, and just where were you thinking? First off, what was the root cause for that? What was the reason for Penn? Was it, I think I can get some better medical help elsewhere? Was it, I need to change the pace? And you ended up going to Alabama, but why leave? And what were the choices you were thinking about potentially leaving?
It went back home after freshman year and really just kind of put things on the shelf. It's like, I've got to think this through. I'm not able to get healthy. So I actually started training again when I got home, and ran a 10 miler on 4th of July, ran 49.50. So, okay, it's still in there. And started running some races over at Bloom, and ran into Jan Johnson, who the Olympic pole vaulter, who was going to Alabama at the time. And he said they had the lead Olympic trainer was their trainer. Flew down, looked at the school, but really flew down just to meet with him. And he said, I can get you healthy. And I said, not surgery. And he said, nope, I can get you healthy by doing strength exercises and stretching and what have you. went down, started, trained with them for a bit, enjoyed it. But then halfway through the season started having some knee problems, and the trainer goes, well, we can do it by scraping, a major surgery, scraping the cartilage and doing it. I said, you know what, I'm done. It's not, you said you weren't going to do surgery. So realizing that once you took it out, you can't put it back in was always my motto. So I never wanted to have real knee surgery. So
when you were at Alabama, you made the choice to come back, but I understand some folks sort of say that you had choices, that it may not be Penn. Did you pondered some other places, I think, right?
I looked at the Air Force Academy. There was a really good runner at the time. I forgot his name. And then also looked at heading out west to Washington State was the other one, because the Henry Rono and all those guys were going there at the same time.
Yep.
So from a training standpoint.
Why come back to Penn? What made you come back? A lot of people credit that too.
Probably the reflection on my original decision, academics and athletics, and having had the exposure of, you might not be able to train and run, you better get a decent degree.
Yep.
So that really influenced a lot.
We're glad you did.
So,
Dave, you come back, and you come back with a vengeance. 71, great year. 72, you miss. 73, now you come back in cross country, Dave, and I think you again win the HEPS, and you're the team is probably the second best cross country team ever in the country, but you're now on a team that won the HEPS. I think you win the Big Five, and you're now in the IC4A race again. And I think, Dave, this is the race where you're going up against Hartnett. And I don't want to minimize the rest of the season, but you're back to dominance the regular season in the HEPS. And you get into the IC4A race, and you're running against one of the better runners in the country in Hartnett. What happens in that race, the first cross country season back?
We were side by side all the way through the back, came out to the plateau, kind of put the pedal down, but he stayed right there. We're going up the Cemetery Hill here. So I dropped him going up the hill. I probably put on 20 yards or so on him. Took off, going down the backside of it. We come out onto the plateau, and we've got like half mile to go to the finish line, and I'm beginning to put the hammer down, and all of a sudden I hear this. Oh, holy shit! I hope those aren't his feet. And he went flying by me. So I'm sitting there going, "Wow, second's bad, not bad." So it's.
And Hartnett gets it, and he just for point of reference, he sets the Van Cortlandt Park record, I think, that day as well. So you helped lead him into a pretty good race that day. And I think, Dave, I introduced you as a guy that one of the greatest runners in Penn history, but when you start looking at your results in the HEPS, cross country, 3-time champion. I'm not sure I've got every track race you run, but Dave, it just seems to me that, well, maybe you can kind of recap for us. In the HEPS championship races, that's the Ivy League plus Army and Navy. Every race that you were in the championship, Dave, I think you won all the way throughout your career. Is that right? Sans any relays?
True.
So I mean,
cross country and track. Yep.
I think, Dave, you probably would go down also as one of the dominant, HEPS distance runners of all time. I don't know if anybody can quite compare to that. Winning as the freshman, now coming in the middle of the year, and I know your last year you would win that as well. It's probably an unprecedented performance in HEPS history, and we weren't a league that was a bunch of slouches, I don't think. I mean,
no.
Army, Navy, good runners.
Well, I was pretty proud of it. One, to be able to come back, and I really appreciated my senior year. It was an opportunity where I do want to talk that senior year. I got one more question, Dave, on that junior year performance. A lot of people wonder about this, but after that race at the IC4As, where you come in second to Hartnett, you run the whole season, and then suddenly the NCAA says, Dave, you can't run in the nationals. I wasn't there. What happened? Why could you run the regular season but not run the nationals? What was going on there? And then the team ended up not going to the NCAA race. It was an NCAA. Tuppen asked you have to petition for the Ivies. The Ivies said, fine, as long as he's coming back to your school, he can run. IC4As led it, and then the NCAA said no for the nationals. top position it, but he said, well, wait a minute, how can he run the IC4As, but he can't run the NCAAs? And I said, nope, it's a national race, it's ours.
Wow, unbelievable. And then the team didn't get to go. And that arguably, Dave, I don't know, looking back on it, it looks like it might be the second best cross-country team Penn ever had.
They were, yeah.
Yeah. Dave, I do want to get to senior year because this is epic. And I know you're proud of it. You should be. We're all proud of it. Senior year cross-country. Dave, when you came back, the next year, Dave, is missing. It's my freshman year. I hardly got to see it all that whole year. It was like he's a ghost. And then you reappear this last year, 1975, 76. And none of us knew what to expect. But I felt, Dave, every workout, every race was all out. That there was a sense of urgency in everything that you did that year. Am I overstating how much that urgency was in your mind at that point, that this was my last hurrah to really, throw down the lever and dominate?
It really was. I had an opportunity over the summer. I lived on the bridle paths, just I drive out every day and put in 10 to 12 miles out there. And I go down, I would actually run down the in indoor track with Hollenbeck. So Hollenbeck had 3 football fields. I go down and run around these football fields for like 4 or 5 miles in the morning just to get some miles in. And then I'd head out to the bridle pass every evening, put in 12, 14, 16 miles all throughout the entire summer. Built up a huge base, and for cross country season, I was ready to go. So
and let me try to recap, Dave. And it is domination. The regular season is going by magnificent, but the first race that's breakout, I think, is you go to Princeton and you beat that course record by over a minute. And I think all of us, our eyes open there where, whoa, that's a cross-country course, a collegiate course, and Dave breaks it by a minute. It's the first time I think we thought, wow, Dave is back. Then you go on to win the Big Five. And Dave, at the Big Five, you've already got the course record, as I recall. And you go out now, and you're going to win this race. I think you're the favorite. But it seemed like you're determined that day to break the record. I mean, was it in your mind's eye then that, look, I've got to beat this course up at all costs? Did it just come to you? What was the rationale that day, and how did you feel about capturing a record you already had on Belmont?
I was in phenomenal shape at that point, and it was kind of a get even because Belmont Plateau just beats you up. It's the toughest course on the East Coast. So I chatted with Tup and he says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I want to go under 25 minutes." And he goes, "What are you going to go out in?" I said, "Hard." I just been putting the hammer down from the get-go and just going. So,
and that record, Dave, as I understand it, has never been beat. That 5.2, not 5, is a record that no one's touched yet.
The good news is they changed the course, so it'll never be broke. It's great.
Good, very good move. Good move. And I don't know, we still could argue why we went to metrics and all, but that's a whole nother story. Dave, you then put in the next performance, which is you go to the IC4A race. You've not won it before. I'm sure you're mentally, this is the one I'm going to win. There's no heart net here. But tell us what your expectations were going into the IC4As. Was this a race, again, where I want to dominate? I want to beat this course to living, what? What was your thinking going in on that IC4A race?
Tactically, it was pretty much the same, Steve. It was one where just put the hammer down from the get-go. Tup, you got to strategize beforehand. He said, what are you looking to do? And I said, I'm going to go from the start. Anybody that wants to go is going to have to pay a price. So let's just take off and go and see who stays there. So,
and I don't think Dave, I don't recall Dave, I'm sure in the middle of the race there were folks nearby, but at the end, I think it was Kurt Olitz second, maybe second, yeah. 70 yards behind. I mean, it was a dominating performance. And I think you took the record down by 16 seconds, maybe?
Pretty close, because Hartnett was right at, I think, 24:02.
No one ever broke in 24 before. And I don't think, Dave, anyone ever broke that time in yards. I'm not sure exactly when they converted to meters.
I went to the metrics at
8,000.
800, 8 meters. So
yeah. And there's still some debate about, the conversion for 8,000 that folks have come now pretty close or maybe just under, but no one ever broke the mile time. And it's, I think when most of us, your teammates think about that race, Dave, that's the one that we think about the most because it's such a legendary course. For us, it was one of your epic performances. I don't know where that stacks for you in terms of epic performances.
One of the more memorable ones, mainly because of what you just said, Steve. It's the course on the East Coast.
Yep.
So to be able to have that, and I'm pretty proud of it. So
The IC4As, Dave, I think up until now, the country kind of doesn't know where you are, I don't think. But the IC4As puts you on the map, I think.
right.
And suddenly, Dave Merrick's back, and you're going to the NCAAs now. From our perspective, I don't know about the rest of the country, but you're one of the favorites now in this race. And I would imagine, Dave, there's added pressure now coming into the NCAA race your senior year.
A little bit more. I think, as I recall, it was from interviews and what have you, that it's kind of one of the top 5 people they're looking at. We had Washington State, we had Nick Rose from Western Kentucky, Craig Virgin.
Nagano, was Nagano?
Yeah, Nano from he was Washington State, and then Arizona State. UTEP had a couple guys, Kenyans as well. But it was one also where I really look forward to it from a challenge standpoint. That it's this will be a good measure of where you are.
Yeah, and Dave, maybe you can walk people through. This is a race where typical Merrick race, you're gunning in the lead right off the bat and pressing, and at the 4-mile mark, you're leading, and then something happens. Tell folks just what happened in that race, and what went on, from that point to the finish.
First mile was a little congested, what have you. And I said, I'm just going to go out and just see where everybody else is. And it just so happens that the pace at that time, it felt comfortable, so I just kept on going. Went through 4 miles and felt really good. I was going to throw a surge in. Nick Rose was there and Craig was there. I said, you know what? I want to throw a surge in here, and let's see who's intending to be there at the end. Just about the time as I was about to throw a surge in, I double over with a stitch, and I can't walk. I'm hobbling along, and do it for about a half mile, to a mile. So from 4 to 5, I go from being in the lead to back about 25th place. And then just as quickly as it came, it went away. So I took off the last mile and passed like 15 guys, but got 9th. So woulda, coulda, shoulda, Craig. Still like to go to redo.
Yeah. Well, we asked Craig about that race, and we want to just share briefly what Craig had to say, who would ultimately win that race. Your prodigy, you helped create this guy. Let me just share with some of his thoughts about that race.
5 years later, I had kept training. I went through my own challenges, just like Dave did in college. And somehow we both survived them, physical and otherwise. And so it was a situation where I was very fortunate to win the NCAA meet that day, and I out-sprinted Nick Rose. But Dave Merrick overcame a lot of challenges in his college career and finished 9th that day. And I was so proud to have 2 guys from Illinois that had raced each other in high school finish in the top 10 at the NCAA meet.
The Illini did well that day, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, the outdoors, indoors, I think, Dave, you ran the distance medley. Was that the year that you did the distance medley, anchored that?
That was the season where Eamon Cogmo got to beat the crap out of me every other weekend in the distance medley. So
I did want to ask you in the end, who was the runner that you maybe respected the most or feared the most or whatever, but would Eamon be right up there?
I would have loved to have done a 3 mile or a 10,000 against him. But we get pitted up for a mile, and it was just, it was never going to happen.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I kept on asking, well, can we change the lineup? Can I run the 3/4 or something else and what have you? Why do you keep on sticking me in the mile? And he goes, you don't mind losing.
Yeah. Yeah, he was tough. Dave, we get to outdoor track, and I remember, and maybe my memory's fading, but I remember before the track season started, you had gone to the doctor again, maybe it was Schuster, and you matter-of-factly said, he told me that I've got the legs of a 50-year-old right now. That's what I remember. I remember my mouth dropped for 2 reasons. One is how in the world is this guy going to run with the legs of a 50-year-old? I mean, I guess in our 60s today, we'd love for the 50-year-old leg.
Yeah,
But
that was good.
yeah, but that was like, how in the world will he compete? And then second, are we all doomed? I mean, are we all going to be, hobbling? We're not hobbling yet, which is good. But that's sort of what I remember as the preface for this season, Dave. And then you go on to do some pretty amazing things. In fact, given your injury situation and where you were, it was pretty phenomenal. I think the first, Dave, kind of goes on at the Penn relays. You, Dave McKee, Bill Huntley, Tommy Murray, you guys are going to enter in the 4x1600 at the relays, and there's a good chance you got a chance to beat the U.S. record. Going into that race, did you think you could do it? You're going up against your nemesis again in Villanova. Tell us about what you thought going in, and then specifically, I think you got the baton right there with Mr. Amon again. Tell us about how that race shook out.
We knew we were in pretty good shape. Villanova obviously was there, so they were probably the pre-meet favorite. Everybody ran. Davey McKee, Tommy Murray, Billy Huntley, everybody ran a great race. And as you saw from that picture, put us right in position. Amon usually follows. However, he took the baton and just took off. So I got to tag along for a half mile, and all of a sudden he had another gear, and I'm going, oops, this isn't going to turn out well. So
yeah, I that year I was in the 5,000 with him in just the finals, and I don't think I ever saw anybody accelerate within 10 yards, put 40 on the field. It was he had an amazing ability.
oh, definitely.
What was your time, Dave, that day in the mile? What was your split?
It was 4:02.
4:02.
Yeah. And
the team, they got the U.S. record.
American record. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Dave, then it's the typical domination in the HEPs, and then because 76 is the bicentennial, there are lots happening in Philly, and the IC4As and the Nationals would be at Penn, Franklin Field, and you now go into a race on the IC4As outdoor track, and it's a good field, and you have a pretty tough race with Robbie Perkins,
right?
Robbie Perkins, I believe.
Yep.
Tell us, again, I look at this year as running on empty almost. You're in a big race. It's been a long season. Tell us how that race went, what you thought you were going to do, and how that race ended up.
I was looking for low 29, 29:10, 29:15, someplace in there, really to qualify for the NCs and the Olympic trials, to get them both out of the way. Nobody in the race helped at all. It was one of those things where I said, well, I'm going to follow for 3 miles and then just kind of take off the last 3 and see what happens. But from the get-go, we were kind of walking. I think we went out and, almost 3 minutes for the first half miles and go, holy cow. So I just took off. Perkins threw a surge in at, I think, at 4.5 miles. Got about 100-yard lead on it, what have you, and kind of chased him for the rest. It started closing on him the last mile, but he had built up too much of a lead. So,
and he was a very good runner.
Good runner, yeah.
He was a good runner, but I sensed, Dave, the training at that time, you were not putting in the kind of mileage yet. It was more like 40, 50 miles. It wasn't your usual, but even with that, you were right there in that race.
I call it training. I was running on empty,
yeah.
Mainly because of the type of runner I am. You run from strength, and that was just really hanging on.
Yeah.
So the race strategy really had to change. I really should have just kind of followed along and let everybody else do the work.
Yep.
And IC4As was one of them. NCAs was pretty much the same thing, except for a lot higher quality runners. So
that NCAA race, Dave, I don't know how you feel about it. I think you finished 6th that day, but I was there to watch that, and for me, it was one of the proudest races I saw because I knew you weren't at full capacity, but yet, here's a picture of you, I think, again at the halfway mark. It's Dave again pressing, and the pace picks up, 3/4 the way in, and even though you can't go to, with those guys at that point, you still muster on that race. What's the school record today? I think
28:48.
Yeah, and to me, Dave, I don't know how you feel about it, but it's one of those proudest things. I put that right up there because it was all on guts that day, I thought.
I take a look at that, and it was one of my prouder races because I had no right running that. That was purely on guts and just kind of hanging on. It
I
was
think,
mind
Dave,
over
you know,
matter.
Yeah, to me, Dave, all that mental work you had done, coping with the injuries and all that this was the fulfillment of that, I thought. At least in my opinion. I thought that was one of your gutsier races, frankly, and it still holds to this day at Penn.
Well, and it was interesting because as I finished that race, I knew it was over. It was one where I could close the book and I said, you'll probably never run again. So.
Well, that was kind of one of my last questions here, Dave. Was it at this point? I've qualified for the Olympic trials, but I'm losing too much right now. It just doesn't. There's nothing in the tank. Is that pretty much where you were at that point?
It was after that race, my Achilles tendon was just inflamed. So I kind of hobbled around. Tup had asked, "Do you want to go out to the Olympic trials?" I said, "Tup, I can't even walk on it." So it's
Yeah.
Close the chapter. And
I have two last questions, Dave. This first one is very unfair. I'll just preface because someone with the credentials you have, there very few of us could even imagine it. But if you could go back, Dave, in time and change anything, do anything differently, whatever, tactic, race, whatever. Is there anything that comes to mind for you, Dave, that you might do differently if you could go back?
I've thought a lot about it, and my dad and I talked quite a bit about it when I took some time off and something else and looked at it, and probably should have gone to University of Illinois because it was a training environment that it was conducive for me. They had back roads that were gravel and everything else, and so the training. I'd go home and I'd come back to Penn healthy, and then the city would just beat me up. I'd make a season and then I'd break down again.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. I was shocked. Craig had indicated to me that he was close to thinking about Penn, but that was his big
inner city stuff.
Yeah, very interesting. The last question, Dave, deals with legacy, and I think a good way to close and then ask you about how you perceive your legacy. I wanted to just share as a kind of a bit of a closing here what Craig Virgin said about your legacy in the sport.
An ideal role model in high school and in college. It's just really bad, really sad that he just didn't have a longer career and ran more post-collegiately, because I think he had all the potential to be one of the all-time great distance runners for America. High school career is comparable to only a handful of other American high school prep distance runners. That will probably be his greatest legacy. Although I will say this, his legend in the back east, in the Ivy League and the IC4A is spotless. And he set times and won races in a way that was incomparable. And I don't even know if there's been another distance runner from the Ivy League or the IC4A to be that dominant.
I don't think there has, Dave. I think he's right.
It was fun. It was a fun year.
Dave, what do you think is your legacy, or maybe what you'd like to have people perceive as your legacy in this sport?
I guess what I'm proudest of, Steve, is something a little different from that. I'm really proud of being part of the Penn family. The reason it was so easy to come back was you guys were family. So why would you come back? I knew you guys, and they help you through things and what have you. And whether it was my freshman year, I lived with Julio and Carl all the time. They got me through my freshman year. Then coming back with Peter, Chris, my twin brother is like Dennis Lunny. He was the only other Midwesterner when I was there. So I had somebody to go through stuff with. So I think probably from a legacy standpoint, I look and I'm just really thankful of the guys that I got to run with and camaraderie that we had. So.
That's great, Dave. I would just say in closing, I guess for me, and I think I speak for teammates, and I know I speak for those three guys that we got to get on the Zoom call. I think, Dave, that the other legacy that
Mark Spitz. Oh, wait a minute.
The other legacy, Dave, that I think is something is how you impacted others. You know, you were willing to go out and talk to people and give them help and advice. And I think because of your role model, I think a lot of us were better because of your role modeling. When I talked to Dave Walters, the first thing he said after, "Hi, how are you?" was, "I've been waiting for this call for 45 years, meaning people should talk about you." Coach Al said, "I was a better coach because of Dave Merrick." And I think, you know, through this video, you've seen Craig Virgin said he was going through some family issues, a death in the family, and a lot of things going on when we did this Zoom call. He said, "There's only a couple people in the world that I would ever separate time to talk," and it was about Dave Merrick. So, you know, Dave, I think part of your legacy is the impact you had on a lot of other people around you, myself included. And it's been a real pleasure and honor. I know I speak for the rest of the team and Penn family. It was a pleasure and honor to have you as a teammate. And that's just one other legacy, Dave, that I think we all have about you.
No, I appreciate it. And, you know, I enjoyed it. Yeah, injuries and, you know, injury included, what have you. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a great experience, both. I wish the running would have gone better, but I really enjoyed the Penn experience, what have you, with you guys and what have you. So
great career, Dave. I'm glad you chose Penn. Glad you hung in there. Thanks a lot, buddy, for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.